This is one of the sketchiest cases I have heard in a hot minute. So back in 1996, a college girl went missing after going to a frat party, and to this day, she is yet to be found. The authorities were so awful at investigating the case, and there's speculation that the university had a big role in covering evidence. A college scandal and a disappearance all in one? It's a double whammy. Now, before I get started, I want to let you guys know that we're making crunch wraps today. One Friday night in 1996, Kristin went to one of her friend's birthday parties. Now, Kristin was a 19-year-old college student at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. And this Friday just so happened to be during Memorial Weekend. So since Kristin was in college and she was going to a party on a Friday night during a holiday weekend, I'm sure you can guess things were gonna get pretty crazy. And this birthday party took place at none other than a frat house. None of Kristin's other friends wanted to go to the shindig, and I don't really blame them. I mean, frat houses scream sweat, desperation, and stench. I mean, I did college once. I mean, that's usually how college parties are. Sometime after 9 p.m., Kristin's friend dropped her off at this party for another college kid named Ryan, who went by the name Swampy. That's the worst name ever. This already seems so suspicious to me. This 19-year-old girl is going to a birthday frat party alone for a dude named Swampy, and her friends just let her? What kind of friends are those? Kristin was kind of pissed her friends wouldn't go to the rager with her. At the time, none of them had been drinking, and I guess the rest of the crew just wasn't in the mood for immersing themselves in a house full of loud music, keg stands, bad dancers, and sloppy drinks. Before leaving Kristin to fend for herself, her friend Margarita told her, "You better be careful." And Kristin said she'd be fine. So she thought. When 1:30 rolled around, Swampy's shindig was starting to fall a bit flat. It was about that time where everyone started dipping out, but little Miss Kristin somehow moseyed on over to the neighbor's lawn where she crashed. Two partygoers named Cheryl and Tim were headed out when they saw Kristin in the grass. Cheryl helped Kristin up to her feet and told her she would walk her back with Tim. Earlier that day, it was pretty warm outside, so Kristin was wearing black running shorts, a crop top, and red sneakers. But if anyone knows anything about California, it's that it gets pretty chilly at night. So the whole time Kristin was walking back to her dorm with Cheryl and Tim, she wouldn't shut up about being cold. And that's when Paul Flores swooped in and was all like, "Here, I'll help you stay warm. Give me your arm. Let me walk with you." Kristin then wrapped her arm around Paul's neck and used him for support and warmth as she walked back. The group of four continued along their way back to their dorms. Tim's dorm was the first stop, so he said his goodbyes and headed to bed. As Kristin, Cheryl, and Paul continued, Cheryl mentioned Paul was being a little weird. He was getting all touchy-feely with Kristin and even tried to get Cheryl to skedaddle so he could be alone with Kristin. As they approached a split in their route, Cheryl peeled off from the group to head back to her dorm. But before she left, Paul apparently asked Cheryl for a kiss. I'm confused here. I thought he was trying to put the moves on Kristin. This dude must be real desperate if he's going after two different girls in front of one another. Cheryl was obviously weirded out, so she turned down his kiss. Paul then asked for a hug, which Cheryl also declined. Has this guy heard of social cues? Like, you gotta read the room, pal. Cheryl obviously isn't into you. Been there, done that, you learn from it, and you move on. Well, Cheryl was finally able to get out of her awkward encounter with Paul and continued on back to her room. Paul and Kristin also headed back to their places. And just like that, everyone was home and safe and sound. Or were they? Earlier that Friday, Kristin called her family and left a voicemail and said, good news, I'll call you on Sunday." So Kristin had a ritual of calling her parents every Sunday, but I'm sure they were super curious as to what their daughter had to say. I mean, sounds like good news. But on Sunday, Kristin never called. Now at first, Kristin's mom thought her daughter may have forgotten about the call because of the holiday weekend, so she kind of just brushed it off and hoped to hear from Kristin in the next day or two. But sadly, that never happened. Kristin didn't call her family and no one had seen her around campus either. After hours of not hearing from or seeing Kristin, her group of friends went to the RA to see if they could open the door to see if they could check on their friend. But the RA refused. And I mean, I kind of don't blame them at that point. Like, these young college kids are basically asking to break into someone's dorm. "Hey, Paula, I know you don't know me, but can you just unlock this other girl's room for me?" That doesn't add up. At the time, Kristin's roommate Crystal was off campus for the weekend, but once she came home that Sunday, she noticed all of Kristin's personal belongings hadn't moved since Friday. Kristin's ID, toiletries, clothing, and other items were still in their place, so Crystal knew her roomie wasn't on a trip or having a sleepover or anything. That Sunday, Crystal actually called the campus police because she was so concerned that Kristin wasn't there yet. But all of her stuff was. But the campus officers assumed the same thing as Kristin's mom. It's a holiday weekend. She's probably just out having fun. Crystal wasn't having that answer. She had a gut feeling that something terrible had happened to her roommate and kept calling campus security. I mean, the 19-year-old girl was last seen at a party stumbling around and hasn't been seen since. I'd be thinking the same thing too. Why were these officers not pressed? Well, after the campus police officers kept gaslighting Crystal, she decided to go to the cops. And once the cops were called, the campus officers were like, oh, Kristin is missing? We'll call her parents ASAP. When Kristin's mom phone rang that Monday, she got all excited thinking it was going to be her daughter with the good news. But much to her dismay, it was actually the campus security officers asking if Kristin had gone home for the weekend. And immediately, her heart dropped. Kristin's mom, Denise, had no idea where her daughter was and started to freak out when the campus police told her that no one else knew where Kristin was. That next day, Kristin's dad, Stan, showed up on campus to try to find his child. As soon as he started talking to the university police, he knew he was gonna have to do the search himself because these people seemed like they had no idea what they were doing. Yeah, I mean, the fact that they waited to call Kristin's parents for so long is no bueno. So I wouldn't be too confident in their investigating abilities either. Well, finally, a huge search ensued with officers on foot, on horses, in helicopters, and with cadaver dogs. There were also a bunch of volunteers who helped in the search. One of the first places investigators looked was Kristin's dorm. When they got there, they found Kristin's wallet and reminders to turn in assignments, so clearly this wasn't your typical, I'm going away for the weekend type of thing. During the search, Kristin's friend Margarita, you know the one who wouldn't go to the party that night and probably felt horrible about it? Yeah. She started helping out and posting flyers to try and find her friend. Margarita even talked to Tim for a bit and told him to call Kristin's mother to tell her everything he knew about the night he walked back with Kristin, Paul, and Cheryl. Tim was like, all right, cool, I can do that. But over 20 years later, he still hadn't called Denise. Okay, that immediately makes me think that Tim had something to do with Kristin's disappearance. I know he was technically the first one to dip out that night, but it seems like everyone was so intoxicated that there was definitely a possibility that they didn't remember things correctly. Or Tim could have gone back for Kristin after Paul and Cheryl left her. Okay, so that Tuesday, 4 days after Kristin was last seen, Denise tried to file a missing persons report, but the San Luis Obispo police officers told Kristin's family it was too early to file. They still thought it was a possibility that Kristin could have gone on a solo trip without telling anyone. Yeah, or taking her wallet. You kind of need money to go anywhere. I mean, unless you hitchhike and scavenge for food, but I feel like that'd be out of the ordinary for a young college girl like Kristin. Regardless of the missing persons report not being opened yet, everyone was still hard at work on the search for Kristin. Campus police officers began pulling people in for interviews to try and figure out what actually happened to Kristin that night. Tim, Cheryl, and Paul were all brought in for questioning. They each gave their testimony about that night. After the interviews, campus police concluded there was no indication of foul play. But something they all failed to notice was the fact that Paul showed up to his interview session with a black eye and some scratch wounds, and he was also the last person Kristin was seen with. But yeah, that's not sketchy. Let the guy go. So the campus police were actually in charge of Denise's case for about a month, but after they realized it was way too much for them to handle alone, they went crying to mama. And in this case, their mama was the district attorney's office. But the DA ended up being more like that babysitter who just sits on their phone the whole time. I know it's a weird metaphor, but just honestly, just stick with me. So basically, the DA's job is to investigate all of the evidence from a case to determine if there's enough stuff to go to court with. At this point, there wasn't really any evidence because the campus police didn't conduct a thorough crime scene. They even let cleaning crews come in and sanitize the dorms, including the dorm of Paul, aka the suspicious guy with the black eye that the campus police somehow didn't find suspicious. Okay, what is going on with these people? I can't believe this girl has been missing for a month and they were so passive about the whole thing. It's like they didn't even want to find her. Instead of going to the DA's office, the university officers should have gone to the sheriff's department to actually conduct a crime scene investigation and gather evidence. But at that point, a whole month had passed, so they probably would have missed a bunch of stuff anyway. And just when you think things couldn't get any more corrupt, get this. The campus police didn't let Kristin's parents file a missing persons report until weeks later. And when they did, an officer apparently took a statement down from Denise that said Kristin went on a camping trip, which Denise denies ever saying. Yeah. I'm pretty sure Denise said she didn't know where Kristin was at all. I can't believe someone would just make that statement up out of the blue. But some followers of the case actually think that that was very intentional. A handful of people came up with a theory that the university had a say in Denise's alleged statement so they could push the responsibility off of them to protect their name and probably avoid several lawsuits. These colleges be shady. And Kristin's dad, Stan, kind of knew this from the get-go. He got the vibes that the campus police weren't going to do squat for his daughter's case, so he would literally drive back and forth from his house to the campus anytime there was a lead in the case. But homeboy lives all the way up in NorCal and the campus was in Central Coast, so this dude literally drove 250 miles to get there. And he claims to have made the drive over 100 times during the heat of the investigation. Yo, that's a lot of driving. You know he really must have not trusted the campus cops to be doing all of that. All right, so at this point, the case had been passed off from the campus police to the DA. The DA officials found out through other students that Paul had a black eye and scraped up knees the day after Kristin's disappearance. So that's when the investigators called Paul back in for another round of questioning. They also brought Cheryl and Tim in as well. When asked about his injuries, Paul couldn't come up with a good lie to tell detectives, so he just went with the story that he had no idea how he got the black eye. He just said, "I woke up with it." Really? Really, dude? How about saying someone punched him at the party or coming up with literally anything else besides it happened in his sleep? Well, unless he went to the paranormal route and said a ghost came in and did a number on his eye, I just don't know how you got that. Later on in the investigation, Paul actually came up with another backstory for his black eye. He claimed he got it from being elbowed at a basketball game, but when some of the players started coming forward saying, he had that before the game, Paul freaked out, took back the statement, and landed on the story that he hit his eye on his truck steering wheel. Dang, this guy's more indecisive than I am at an ice cream shop. Like, have you ever gone to 31 Flavors? You can't just pick one ice cream, you gotta have multiple. I just can't make up my mind. So Paul told these officers that he last saw Kristin when they parted ways after walking back from Swampy's B-Day bash that night. But that's not what Paul's roommate was told. Paul's roommate had been gone for the weekend, and when he came back and found out about Kristin's disappearance, he started asking questions about her. And Paul, his roomie, he said, "She's home with my parents." Wait, what? So Paul apparently said that in a joking manner. But when Kristin's friend and family found out Paul's parents just laid new concrete in the back of one of their homes, they started to think Paul's joke wasn't actually a joke and thought Kristin could be buried underneath the cement. Oh my God, please do not tell me this dude's parents are in on it too. I'm no expert, but I feel like Paul's parents should be setting a good example for their kid, not covering up for his crimes. After Paul's roommate told them about the suspicious joke, the DA investigators knew they needed to crack down on Mr. Polyboy. They brought him in for questioning again, and this time they set him up to a lie detector test and filmed the whole thing. Over the course of the 90-minute interview, Paul started curling up into a little ball because he was so pressed about everything. The investigators continued to go ham on Paul until he suddenly snapped. After being triggered by one of the questions, Paul jumped to his feet and said, "If you are so smart, then tell me where the body is." After that, he stormed out of the room. Can you say drama queen? No, but seriously, that's a pretty bold move from Paul. He was testing the investigators hardcore by saying that. So Paul is starting to look super suspicious, and it's only getting worse from here. After the campus police pressed the case to the DA, it was eventually forwarded along to the sheriff's department, who should have been given the case in the first place. When the sheriff's department took over, deputies decided to do another search of the campus. They brought in cadaver dogs who immediately ran to Paul's dorm room one at a time. And by this point, Paul's dorm had already been heavily cleaned and sanitized by the university. Each dog was brought in the room individually, and every single one of them barked at the same three spots: the corner of Paul's mattress, his phone, and his trash can. There wasn't much physical evidence since Paul's room had been cleaned so thoroughly, but because of the dogs' reactions, they knew there was a corpse in that room at some point, and it had made contact with those three spots. Based on everything that they knew, investigators came up with this theory. After Cheryl walked back to her dorm, which left Paul and Kristin alone, Paul took Kristin back to his place. Paul tried to get with Kristin, but she tried to fight him off and ultimately lost. Once she bit the dust, it is believed that Paul took Kristin to an unknown site off campus. Now here's where the story splits off into two theories. The first theory is that Paul drove Kristin off in his truck. When asked about the location of his truck, Paul claimed it had been stolen, but he never filed a report, so a lot of people thought that that was a cover-up for the fact that he used the truck to transport Kristin. Holy crap, what? The second theory is that Paul drove Kristin off-site in a golf cart because he had a bunch of DUIs. There was also a golf cart that went missing that day. Wait, Okay, so that's so embarrassing, and that's really what happened. This dude just executed a girl and drove off in a golf cart that probably couldn't go more than 30 miles an hour. Now that's a story right there. So if that's really what happened, where did Paul take Kristin? Some people thought that she was dumped at Paul's parents' house and buried under fresh concrete. And a few weeks after the incident, a woman who was renting a house from Paul's parents found a turquoise earring in the driveway with dried vital fluid on it. Want to know who owned a turquoise pair of earrings? Kristin. Investigators apparently took the earring as evidence, but never told Kristin's parents about it. Denise and Stan literally didn't find out about Kristin's earring until the tenant brought it up one day in a court deposition, and they were all like, wait, what earring? And after they found out about it, Kristin's parents tried to see the earring, and the deputies claimed they lost it. Okay, this case is just one big old bucket of yikes. Why does everyone have to be so shady? Paul's parents' houses were searched a handful of times when all of this was going on. In their first search, officials basically just strolled through one of the houses and left. The only evidence they found was some newspaper clippings about Kristin's case. The other searches were pretty uneventful, and due to the limits of their search warrants, officials weren't able to dig up the backyard to see if Kristin was really buried underneath the concrete. In 2002, 6 years after the initial incident, Kristin was legally declared deceased, even though her corpse had not been found. Over the course of the next 19 years, investigators requested a bunch more search warrants for very specific items in Paul's house, as well as his dad's house. And finally, it looks like authorities got their together, because on April 13, 2021, they found biological evidence that Kristin had been buried underneath the deck of Paul's dad's house, but believe her body has since been moved to an unknown location. Shortly after that, Paul and his dad Ruben were arrested for the case. Paul was charged for the slaying in the first degree, and Ruben has been charged as an accessory. Both men pled not guilty, but we all know how that goes. Oh, and one of the main reasons they even got these men arrested was because of a podcast. So there's a 6-episode podcast about the Kristin Smart case called Your Own Backyard that officials say urged more witnesses to come forward, leading to the arrest of Paul and Ruben. So the podcast basically solved the whole case. And do you know what that means? Killer Bites could help solve the next mysterious case if you pay close enough attention. So let us know what you want us to try and crack in the comments, and we will get right to work. Well, guys, I think that is a wrap for today, and it was a pleasure talking crime with all of you.